Every night for 19 years I sat at the same table with the same ledger and wrote down what the day had cost me and what it had given back, because numbers don't lie and people do, and after my wife went into the ground, I decided I'd had my fill of things that lie. Weather, debt, the price of feed. I wrote it all down. It kept the world tidy. And then one cold October morning, I climbed into my own hayloft and found something I had no column for. A woman, a child, both of them half frozen, both of them looking at me like I was the last hard whether they'd have to survive. I could have turned them out. I want you to understand that I thought about it the way you think about stepping over a snake instead of around it. I had every reason. A stranger in your barn is a stranger in your barn. But there are some things you can't write down and stay the same man afterward. This is the story of the winter I stopped keeping an honest ledger and started keeping something else. Stay with me, it doesn't end where you think. I heard the crying before I saw them, and for a long moment I stood at the bottom of the ladder and told myself it was a barn cat. It was not a barn cat. I know the sound a cat makes when it's got kittens up in the hay, that low churring complaint, and this was nothing like it. This was thin and human and terrified, a small ragged sound trying very hard to be no sound at all, and that was the part that made the hair stand up on my arms, that whoever was making it was fighting to keep it quiet. You don't fight to keep quiet unless you've learned somewhere that being heard gets you hurt. I stood there in the dark of the barn with the lantern shaking a little in my hand, and I said, "Whoever's up there, come down slow." The crying stopped. Not gently. All at once, the way a candle goes out. And then there was a silence so complete I could hear the horses shifting in their stalls behind me, could hear the wind working at the loose board on the north wall the way it had all week, could hear my own heart doing something I didn't much care for. "I got a gun," I said, which was a lie. I had a lantern and 41 years and a bad knee. "Come down." "Nothing. I want to tell you I was brave. The truth is I was tired." It was 5 in the morning and cold enough that the water in the trough had a skin of ice on it, and I'd come out to pitch hay before the sun, the way I did every day of my life, and I did not have room in me for a stranger. I had exactly enough for the cattle, the horses, the ledger, and sleep. That was the whole size of my life by then. I'd shrunk it down on purpose. So when nobody answered, I climbed the ladder. I don't know what I expected. A drifter, maybe. A boy run off from some place sleeping rough. I'd had those before, back when Sarah was alive and we kept a softer house, and she'd feed them and I'd grumble and they'd move on. This felt different from the first rung. The barn felt held, the way a room feels when someone in it is holding their breath. I came up into the loft with the lantern out ahead of me, and there they were. A woman pressed back into the far corner where the hay was piled highest, with her knees up and her arms wrapped around a bundle I didn't understand at first. She was younger than me by a good stretch, though it was hard to say, because her face had the drawn look of someone who'd been hungry a long time and cold longer. Her hair was dark and matted, and there was hay in it. She had a man's coat on, too big, worn through at the elbows. And her eyes, when the lantern found them, did not blink and did not look away and did not beg. They just watched me, the way a cornered animal watches, measuring how bad it's about to be. And the bundle in her arms moved, and made that small human sound again, and I understood. A baby, she had a baby. For a moment neither of us said a thing. The lantern hissed. Somewhere below a horse blew out its breath. I stood there at the top of my own ladder feeling like the intruder, and she sat there in my hay with her child pulled up against her chest, and we looked at each other across 10 feet of cold morning like two people who'd both come to the same place to be alone and found out they couldn't be. "Ma'am," I said finally, because I didn't know what else to say. Because my mother raised me to say ma'am, even to trespassers, even at 5 in the morning. She flinched at the word like I'd raised a hand. "I ain't got money," she said. Her voice was low and rough with cold. "If that's what you come up for, I ain't got nothing worth taking, and I'll go. Just and hear it crack just slightly just once, and she pulled the baby tighter. Just let me get down the ladder my own self. Don't grab at me. I'll go." I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count in the years since. Don't grab at me, the particular way she said it. She wasn't afraid I'd turn her out into the cold. She'd made her peace with the cold. She was afraid of my hands. Something in me went very still. "Nobody's grabbing at anybody," I said. I set the lantern down on the loft floor slow so she could see me do it, and I sat down on the top rung of the ladder with my hands where she could see them. It's cold out there. You know that better than me, I expect. You don't need to go anywhere at 5 in the morning with a baby. I'll go when the sun's up then. You'll go when you're ready to go, I said. This is a barn, it's got hay in it, hay's for keeping warm, far as I'm concerned that's what it's doing. She didn't trust it. Why would she? She watched me the way you watch a dog that's wagging its tail but you've been bitten before, and I let her watch, and I didn't move. And after a while the baby started up again. A real cry this time, the frustrated, hungry cry of an infant who's been asked to be brave longer than infants can manage. And she shushed it and bounced it and looked at me over the top of its head with an expression I'd never forget. Shame, that was the thing in her face. Not fear anymore, or not only fear. She was ashamed that I was watching her fail to comfort her own child. How old? I said. What? The baby, how old? She hesitated. 4 months, little over. 4 months? Born in June, then. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. That was the ledger in me, always counting. And I thought about a woman being pregnant through the past winter, and where she might have been. And what kind of road led a mother and a newborn to a stranger's hayloft in the last week of October, with winter coming down out of the mountains like a held breath about to let go? I didn't ask, you don't ask. A man learns that. There's a stove in the house, I said instead, and coffee. And I got oats and I got milk from the cow that ain't for the calf yet, and I expect that baby'd do better with something warm in it than something cold. I stood up slow, keeping my hands loose. I'm going down to start the fire. You can come or you can stay. Door'll be open either way. I'll leave it to you. And then, and I don't know why I did this, except that it seemed important that she have something I couldn't take back, I said, My name's Elias Crane. This is my place. You're safe on it. She didn't answer. I climbed down the ladder and went and started the fire, and I did not look back to see if she followed, because I had a feeling that being watched was the last thing in the world that woman needed. I'll tell you a little about myself, because you'll want to know what kind of man leaves his door open to a stranger, and the honest answer is, not a good one. Or not a good one in the way people mean when they say it. I was not a generous man. Ask anyone in Miller's Bend, the little nothing town 9 miles down the valley, and they'd tell you Elias Crane paid his debts and expected the same and kept to himself, and hadn't been to church since he buried his wife. All true. I ran 200 head on 400 acres of grass and rock in the Bitterroot country, and I ran it alone, and I liked it alone, because alone nobody could be taken from me again. Sarah died in the spring of '89. I won't dress it up. Fever took her over 4 days, and there wasn't a thing the doctor could do but stand in my kitchen and look at his boots. We'd had 11 years and no children. That was a sorrow we'd learned to carry quiet, the two of us, the empty rooms of it. And then I had no wife and no children and 400 acres of the most beautiful, lonesome country God ever made. And I filled it up with work, and I filled the evenings up with the ledger. The ledger was Sarah's idea, if you want to know. Early on, when we were poor and scared, she'd said we ought to write down every cent so we'd know exactly how frightened to be. And it worked. Writing it down made it finite. A number you could look at was a number you could beat. After she passed, I kept doing it every night. And somewhere along the way it stopped being about money and started being about, I don't know, keeping account. Making sure that at the end of each day something was written down, so that the day had happened, so that I had happened, so that the whole silent enterprise of my life left a mark somewhere, even if only in my own hand in a book nobody else would ever read. I'm telling you this so you'll understand what it meant that I couldn't find a place to write her down. Because that first night, after she'd finally come inside, after I'd fed her stew she ate too fast and then was ashamed of eating too fast. After I'd warmed milk and she'd fed the baby and the baby had gone quiet and heavy-eyed in that boneless way babies do. That first night I sat down at my table with my pen and my book, and I did not know what column she went in. She was asleep by then. I'd given her the bedroom, mine and Sarah's old room, and I'd taken the chair by the stove. I could hear her breathing through the door, and under it the tiny, quick breaths of the child, and I sat there with the lamp turned low, and I stared at the blank line where the day's account was supposed to go. What had she cost me? A bowl of stew, some milk. A night in a bed I hadn't slept in for 4 years anyhow. What had she given back? I couldn't write it. There wasn't a number. And it bothered me more than I can say, sitting there, pen dry, the tidy arithmetic of my whole life suddenly missing a figure. Because if I couldn't account for a thing, then I couldn't keep it finite. and if I couldn't keep it finite then, I didn't know how frightened to be. I closed the book without writing anything. First time in 4 years. I did not sleep well. Her name was Ruth. I learned it the second morning, and I learned it the way you learn everything true about a guarded person, sideways, by accident, when they've forgotten to guard. The baby was crying at dawn, and I heard her get up to see to it, moving quiet through the house that wasn't hers, and I heard her murmuring to it low, and I heard her say, "Hush now, hush, it's all right. Ruth's got you, Ruth's got you." And I lay there in the dark by the stove and thought, so that's your name. You told the child your name to comfort it and gave it to me by mistake. I got up and made coffee and pretended I hadn't heard. She came out with the baby on her hip and her hair pushed back, and she looked, in the gray morning light, less like a cornered animal and more like a person, and younger even than I'd thought, 22, 23 maybe. She stood in the kitchen doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to cross it. "I'll be gone today," she said. "Soon as it warms, I'm obliged for all of it. I'll not forget it." "Where'll you go?" I said, not unkind, just a question. I was frying eggs. I slid 2 onto a plate and set it at the far end of the table away from me so she wouldn't have to sit close. "West," she said. "Got people west, sort of." Sort of, I knew a lie when I heard one, and it wasn't even a good lie. It was the kind of lie a person tells because the truth is a locked door they can't open, and I let it lie. I nodded at the plate. "Eat first. West'll keep." She ate. She fed the baby bits of egg yolk off her finger, and the baby made a face and ate them anyway. And I watched sideways while pretending to read the almanac, and there was something in the sight of it. A woman feeding a child at my table, in Sarah's chair, in the gray morning. That opened a door in my chest I'd nailed shut a long time ago, and I did not care for the draft that came through it. "That your husband's coat," I said. I don't know why I said it. It was a cruel thing to say, and I knew it the second it was out. She went still. The baby fussed, and she settled it without looking down. "Was," she said. "I'm sorry." "He ain't dead," she said it flat, looking at the wall. "Just was my husband, ain't any more, there's a difference." And there it was. The locked door opened just a crack, and behind it something I recognized even though I'd never lived it. The particular ruin of a woman who'd left a man rather than stay. Which in that country in that year meant she'd chosen the road, and the cold, and the hayloft over whatever was in the house she'd run from. And I thought about "Don't grab at me," and I thought about a coat worn through at the elbows on a man's frame 2 sizes bigger than hers. And I did the arithmetic, and this time the number came up clear, and I wished it hadn't. "You don't got to tell me nothing," I said. "I wasn't going to," she said. And then this is the part I remember, she almost smiled. Just the corner of her mouth, just for a second, dry as August. It was the first crack in her I'd seen that wasn't fear or shame. It was somebody in there, somebody with sand. "You always this friendly at breakfast, Mr. Crane." "Every morning," I said. "It's why I got no friends." And she did smile then, a real one, small and quickly hidden, and the baby grabbed a fistful of her hair and pulled, and she winced and laughed and untangled it. And for about the length of one breath my kitchen had laughter in it, which it had not had in 4 years, and I had to get up and go stand at the stove with my back to her so she wouldn't see whatever was happening on my face. She didn't leave that day. It came on to snow by noon, early, mean, the first real snow of the year, spitting out of a sky the color of a bruise, and even Ruth, who I could tell would have walked into a blizzard on pure pride, couldn't argue with a baby and a snowstorm. She stayed. I told her she could sleep in the barn if she'd rather, thinking she'd want the distance, and she looked at me a long moment and said she'd rather the house, if it was all the same on account of the baby and the cold. And I understood that she was deciding, right then, to trust me a little, and that it was costing her something, and I nodded and didn't make a thing of it. The snow kept up 2 days, then 3. And in 3 days, a thing happened that I have never been able to properly explain, which is that my life got bigger without my permission. Started small. She fixed the loose board on the north wall of the barn. I came in from the cattle to find her up on a crate with a hammer, the baby bundled in a nest of hay nearby, driving nails like she'd done it her whole life. "It was rattling," she said, defensive, like I'd catch her at something. "Kept the baby up, I fixed it." I said the board had been rattling for 2 years and I'd never got to it, and she said, "Well, it ain't rattling now," and got down off the crate, and that was that. Then it was the mending. She found my shirts. I had a pile of them, torn and buttonless, that I'd been meaning to deal with the way I'd been meaning to deal with the board, and she mended them without asking, sitting by the stove in the evenings with the baby asleep and my sorry shirts in her lap. And I'd look up from the ledger and there she'd be, and the lamp would catch the side of her face, and I'd look back down quick. Then it was the cooking. She could make more out of my stores than I'd known was in them. Biscuits, a stew that had actual flavor to it. She apologized for using so much of my flour, and I told her not to be a fool, and she went quiet, and I realized fool was maybe a word that had been used on her before. In that house she ran from, and I said I was sorry, and she said it was all right, and it wasn't, but we let it be. Every night I sat down with the ledger. Every night I couldn't write her. What column does a woman go in who mends your shirts and fixes your barn and fills your quiet house with the sound of a baby laughing at dust motes in the morning light? What's the figure for that? What did she cost me? Flour, milk, a bed. And what did she give back? I couldn't write it, so I stopped trying. I'd open the book, look at the blank line, and close it again, every night. And every night the not writing felt less like a failure and more like, I don't know, like the first honest thing I'd done in 4 years. Like admitting there was a part of my life that couldn't be counted. On the 4th night the snow stopped and the sky cleared and it got cold, truly cold, the kind of cold that kills. And that was the night the baby got sick. I woke to Ruth's voice, not shushing this time. Sharp, scared. No, 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 come on, and under it the baby making a sound I hadn't heard before, a thin wheezing bark, and I was up and across the house and into the doorway before I'd thought about it. She had the child up against her shoulder, patting its back, and its little face was flushed dark, and it was fighting to breathe. That terrible seal bark cough, and Ruth looked up at me, and every wall she'd built in 4 days was gone from her face, and what was underneath was a mother watching her child not be able to breathe. Something's wrong, she said. Something's wrong with her, Elias. She can't get her breath, something's. Elias, not Mr. Crane, first time. How long? I said, already reaching for my boots. Just now it come on just now. She was fine, and then she, Elias. What do? I don't. Croup, I said, I knew it. I'd seen it in calves, in lambs, and once in a neighbor's child years back, the terrible barking of it. It's the cold air, it's croup. We can help it, trust me. Can you trust me for the next hour? She looked at me. The baby barked and wheezed against her shoulder, and I watched her make the hardest decision I ever saw a person make, which was to hand her whole heart to a man she'd known 4 days. Yes, she said. Then get her wrapped, we're going to the barn. And I want to end here, on the 2 of us going out into that killing cold with a sick child between us, because that was the moment. I know it now, though I didn't then. That was the moment I stopped being a man with a ledger and became a man in a story. We ran. The barn in the dark is a different country than the barn by day. I know that place better than I know my own face. Every stall, every beam, the exact spot where the floor dips by the tack wall. And still, that night, running into it with a lantern in one hand and Ruth at my shoulder with the baby barking against her, it felt like somewhere I'd never been. Fear does that. Fear takes a place you've walked 10,000 times and makes it strange. Makes every shadow a thing that might reach out. Makes the familiar smell of hay and horse and manure suddenly sharp and foreign in your throat. Here, I said, the far stall, come on. I'd thought it out on the run over, quick, the way you think when there's no time to think. Croup wants steam. I'd learned that years back from old Doc Ferris before he passed. The child that can't breathe needs wet, warm air. And there's 2 ways to get it. And the fastest was right here in the barn where the animals threw off heat all night, and I had a way to make steam fast. Hold her up, I said. Keep her up against you, keep her upright, don't lay her down. I was already moving, dragging the big kettle out from under the workbench where I kept it for wash days, the one I used for scalding, filling it from the water barrel that hadn't yet frozen through. My hands were shaking. I told them to stop, and they didn't. Talk to her, keep her calm. The more she cries, the worse it pulls at her. Keep her easy. How, Ruth said. Her voice was thin. How do I keep her easy when she can't breathe? How am I supposed to? Sing to her. I can't. Sing to her, Ruth. And she did. God, she did. She stood in the middle of my barn in the dead, cold middle of the night with her dying, scared child up against her neck, and she started to sing low, cracked off the note, some hymn or lullaby I didn't know, something with a river in it, and her voice was shaking as bad as my hands, but she kept it up. And the baby's barking eased just a fraction, just enough. the way a frightened thing quiets when the arms around it decide to be brave. I got the little sheet iron stove going in the corner. I kept it out there for the coldest nights when a calf needed warming, and I got the kettle on it, and I built the fire up hot and fast, feeding it kindling till it roared, and I hung horse blankets from the beams around the stall to hold the air close, and we waited for the water to boil. And it was the longest wait of my life, standing there watching a woman sing to a baby that was fighting for each breath, watching the kettle and willing it to steam, and doing the only thing I know how to do when I'm helpless, which is count. I counted her breaths, the baby's, little quick wet ones. I counted them the way I count everything, and I made a bargain with a god I hadn't spoken to since Sarah went in the ground. Just let me keep counting them. That's all. Just don't let the number stop. The kettle steamed. I poured it into a shallow pan and set it near, and the warm, wet air filled the little tented space, and I said, "Now hold her over it, not too close, let her breathe it. That's it, that's it." And we waited again. I have sat with dying things before. It's part of the work. You learn the look of a thing that's going and a thing that's turning, and there's a moment, if you're lucky, if God's paying attention that night, where you can feel it turn, where the animal in your arms stops fighting against something and starts just breathing, plain breathing, and the whole world tips back level. The baby turned. It came slow. The barking softened to a rasp, and the rasp to a wheeze, and the wheeze to just breath, hard one, wet, but breath in and out, and the little body that had been rigid as a fence rail went slack and heavy against Ruth's shoulder, and the baby made a sound that wasn't a cough at all. A complaint. A tired, ordinary infant complaint about being awake and damp at an ungodly hour. I have never in my life been so glad to hear a baby fuss. Ruth made a sound I won't try to describe. Half a sob, all of it relief, the sound of a rope that's been pulled tight for hours suddenly given slack. She sank down onto the hay with the baby against her, and she rocked and she wept, quiet into the top of that small head, and I turned away and busied myself with the stove so she could do it private, because there are some things a person shouldn't be watched doing, and coming apart from relief is one of them. "She's all right," Ruth kept saying. "She's all right, she's all right." "She's all right," I said. "It'll come back, the croup, it does that, it'll likely come again the next night or two, it likes the small hours. But now you know what to do, steam, warm, wet air. You can beat it now you know its trick." "You knew its trick." She looked up at me over the baby's head, and her eyes were wet and shining in the stove light, and there was something in them I hadn't earned and didn't know what to do with. "You knew right off. You didn't even, you just knew." "I've kept animals a long time," I said, which was true, and was also me putting distance between us because the way she was looking at me was more than I could hold. "A body learns." "That ain't animals," she said quietly. "That's a baby, my baby, and you run out into the cold at 3 in the morning like she was your own." I didn't have an answer for that. I looked at the fire. "What's her name?" I said, to change it, to have something to say. I realized I'd been calling the child the baby and her for 4 days and never once asked, and it seemed suddenly a shameful thing, that I'd steamed the croup out of a child whose name I didn't know. Ruth looked down at her, brushed the damp dark hair off the small forehead with one finger. "Sarah," she said. And the barn went very quiet, and the fire cracked, and I stood there with the whole weight of that name coming down on me out of nowhere like a roof beam letting go. She saw my face. She couldn't have known. I'd never said my wife's name to her, never said I'd had a wife at all beyond the once, but she saw something go across me and she frowned. "What? What is it?" "Nothing," I said. My voice didn't come out right. "It's a good name." "It's a fine name." "It was my grandmother's." "It's a fine name," I said again, and I turned back to the stove, and I fed it a stick of wood it didn't need. And behind me Ruth started singing again, soft now, the river song, to a baby named Sarah who was breathing easy in a barn that had, 4 years ago, been part of a farm 2 people built together with plans for children who never came. I did not tell her. Not then. It didn't seem to belong to me any more, the grief. Or it belonged to me, but it wasn't the important thing in the room, and I'd learned that much at least, that a man's old sorrow doesn't get to be the center of every room he carries it into. But I'll tell you true, I stood at that stove and I felt Sarah in the barn with us. My Sarah, and it did not feel like a haunting. It felt like a hand on my shoulder. It felt, God help me, like permission. We stayed out there till dawn, taking turns with the steam, and somewhere in the black hours we talked, really talked. For the first time, the way people do when they've been through a hard thing together and the ordinary rules have burned off like fog. She told me some of it, not all. You never get all and you shouldn't want it. His name was Amos. She didn't say it like a curse, which somehow made it worse. She said it flat, careful, the way you'd name a wound to a doctor. They'd married when she was 17 because her people had nothing and he had 80 acres and a house, and everyone said she was lucky and she'd believed them at first. It was good at first. It's always good at first, she said, and the way she said it told me she'd spent a lot of nights trying to find the exact day it stopped being good, so she could understand what she'd done to turn it. It weren't nothing you did, I said. You don't know that. I know that, I said. A man that grabs at a woman, that's in the man. It ain't in her. It was in him before you ever walked up the aisle, and it'd have come out on whoever stood where you stood. You didn't turn him. He was always turned. She was quiet a long time. He didn't start, she said finally, till I was carrying her. That's the thing I can't, that's the part I turn over and over. He was near decent till there was a baby coming, like the baby coming was the thing he couldn't stand. Like there wasn't room in him for it. I thought about that. I thought about a man who couldn't stand there being one more thing in the world to love, and I thought about how close that was, how uncomfortably close, to a man who'd shrunk his whole life down to 200 head of cattle, and a ledger so nothing could ever be taken from him again. There, but for the grace of God. A hard man is a hard man. The only difference between Amos and me, maybe, was that my hardness turned inward and ate me, and his turned outward and ate everyone near him. It was not a comfortable thought. I've had it many times since. So you left, I said. So I left, she shifted the sleeping baby. Waited till he was gone to town for the fall selling, took what I could carry and the horse, and I went. Horse threw a shoe 40 miles on and went lame, and I turned it loose 'cause I couldn't do nothing for it. And I've felt bad about that horse every day since, which is a foolish thing to feel bad about when you've left a whole life, but there it is. Walked the rest. Slept where I could. Your barn was, she almost laughed, that dry laugh, your barn was the first place in 11 days that had a roof and no man in it. I figured I'd steal a night's warmth and be gone before anybody knew. I'm sorry for that, for sneaking. Don't be sorry for staying alive, I said. That's the one thing in this world nobody ought to apologize for. She looked at me then, long in the gray coming light through the barn's east window, and she said, You're a strange man, Elias Crane. So I'm told. No, I mean, she searched for it. Men are kind when it costs them nothing. I've known kind men, kind till the moment it wanted something of them, and then the kindness was just a coat they took off. You fed us 4 days and run out in the cold for a baby that ain't yours, and you don't look at me like I owe you. Most men, by now, there'd be a bill coming. I keep waiting for the bill. And this is the thing I want you to understand about that morning, because it changed me. I heard, in the way she said I keep waiting for the bill, the whole shape of what her life had taught her. That everything is a transaction. That kindness is credit, and credit gets called in. That she was a debt to be collected on, that she'd always been a debt to somebody, and that she'd been sitting in my house for 4 days doing the arithmetic, mending my shirts, fixing my barn, cooking my food, trying to pay down a bill I hadn't even known I was keeping. And I thought about my ledger, my whole life written in columns, what things cost, what they gave back. I'd built my grief a counting house and moved in. And I understood, standing in that barn, that I had been doing to my own life exactly what Amos had done to Ruth. I'd made everything a transaction. I'd made myself a debt to be balanced. And the reason I couldn't write Ruth in the ledger, the reason the pen went dry every night, was that she was the first thing in 4 years that had come to me free. No bill, no column, just given. There's no bill, Ruth, I said, and my voice was rough and it wasn't from the cold. There ain't going to be a bill, not now, not ever. Whatever you're paying down in your head, stop. The account's clear. It was clear the minute you walked in. You don't owe me a mended shirt, and you don't owe me a fixed board, and you don't owe me. I had to stop. You don't owe me anything, you hear me. Nothing. She stared at me. And then she started to cry, not the relief crying from before, but something older and deeper. The kind that comes up from a place that's been locked so long you forget it's there. And she cried into her sleeping baby's blanket, and I did the only thing I knew, which was to sit there with her and not touch her and not leave, just be there, be a still safe thing in the room until it passed. When it passed, the sun was up. I'll make coffee, I said. All right, she said. Neither of us said anything about her leaving. Not that morning. It was the first morning that the word West didn't get spoken, and we both noticed, and neither of us named it, and that too is how people are. She stayed on. There was no conversation about it, no arrangement made. It happened the way water finds a channel a day, and then a week, and then the first hard freeze locked the valley down and the question answered itself, and somewhere in there my house stopped being a place I lived alone and became a place three of us lived, and I didn't fight it, and that was the strangest part. Elias Crane, who'd shrunk his life to a fist, opened his hand. I built a cradle. Winter evenings in the barn by lamplight good pine, sanded smooth, rockers I steamed and bent myself. I told Ruth it was so the baby'd sleep better and stop kicking her all night, which was true. And I didn't tell her the other true thing, which was that I'd started a cradle once before, in the spring of another year, and never finished it, and burned it the week after Sarah's fever. And that finishing this one was a thing I was doing for a man 4 years dead who happened to be me. Little Sarah took to it. She was a good baby, once she was warm and fed and the croup had passed, quick to laugh, grabby, fascinated by my beard, which she'd fist and yank while I made faces to keep her giggling, a thing I'd have sworn on a Bible I was not the kind of man to do. Ruth would watch us and shake her head. "You're soft as churned butter," she'd say. "And here I took you for a hard old rock." "I am a hard old rock," I'd say with the baby chewing my knuckle. "This is what hard rocks do. Everybody knows this." And she'd laugh and the house would have laughter in it, and I stopped opening the ledger at night altogether. Just stopped. Left it on the shelf gathering dust. I didn't need to count the days anymore. I was living them. I should have known it couldn't hold. Nothing that good in that country ever held for long. The winters were too hard, and the world was too mean, and I, of all people, should have known that the ledger always balances in the end whether you keep it or not. The bill came in February. It came on a horse up my road, in the thin, bright cold of a Tuesday afternoon, and I was mending fence in the near pasture, and I saw the rider a long way off, and something in me went cold before I could name it. Something in the set of the man on the horse, the way he sat, the way he came on slow and looking, reading my place the way you'd read a thing you meant to take. He drew up at my gate. Big man. Bigger than me, younger than me, with a face that might have been handsome before something soured in it. He had a good coat and a good horse, and the particular ugly confidence of a man who's used to being the hardest thing in any field he stands in. "Afternoon," he said, "looking for my wife." And I knew, of course I knew. I'd known since the shape of him crested the hill. I set down my fence tools slow, and I straightened up, and I felt every one of my 41 years and my bad knee, and I felt, too, something I hadn't felt in a long time, not fear, though there was fear in it. Something older and steadier than fear. "Don't know your wife," I said. "Don't know you." "Amos Kell," he smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. "And I think you do know her friend, woman, dark hair, baby girl. Word in Miller's Bend is the hard old bachelor out on the Crane place took in a stray this winter." He looked past me up the road, toward the house, toward the smoke coming up soft and domestic from my chimney. "Reckon that's my stray. So why don't you go on and fetch her, and will be no trouble to you, and I'll be obliged for you keeping her fed through the cold." Man ought to thank another man for minding his property. His property. I thought about a great many things very fast. I thought about the rifle in the house and how far it was. I thought about Ruth's face when she'd said, "Don't grab at me." I thought about a baby named Sarah breathing easy in a cradle I'd built with my own hands. I thought about the law, which in that country was 9 miles away and 100 years behind, and which would side with a husband over a runaway wife every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And I thought about my ledger, and about bills coming due, and about the one thing I had learned this whole strange winter, which was that some accounts a man refuses to pay no matter what it costs him, and that the refusing is the only thing that makes him a man at all. "She ain't here," I said. Amos Kell stopped smiling. "Now that's a lie," he said softly, "and I think we both." "She ain't here," I said again, and I picked my fence tools back up, unhurried, and the heaviest of them, the post maul, I kept in my right hand, and I let him see me keep it. "And you're on my land. And I'll tell you what I know about my land, Mr. Kell, since you're new to it. I know every foot of it. I know where the ground's soft and where a man could go down in the spring melt and not come up till the flies found him in June. I've run it alone 11 years, and buried what needed burying and asked nobody's leave. So you sit that horse and you look at my chimney all you like, but there ain't nothing up that road belongs to you, and if you come through my gate to check, you'll be checking a thing you can't uncheck." It was the longest speech I'd made in 4 years, and I meant every cold word of it. He looked at me, and I watched him do the arithmetic, a hard man reading another hard man weighing it, trying to find the bluff. I don't know what he saw in my face. I know what was in me, which was that I had already decided fully and finally, standing at that fence, that this man was not getting up my road while I drew breath, and that some part of that decision must have reached my eyes, because after a long moment Amos Kell's horse shifted under him and he gathered the reins. "This ain't finished," he said. "Didn't figure it was," I said. "I'll be back with the sheriff, with paper. She's my lawful wife, and that's my lawful child, and no rock-hearted saddle tramp is going to." "Then go get your paper," I said. "Go on, ride the 9 miles and get it. And while you're riding, Mr. Kell, you have a good long think about what it's going to look like. A man that beat a woman big with child, standing in front of a judge, explaining why she'd rather sleep in a stranger's hayloft in October than one more night under his roof. You have a think about which of us that paper's going to embarrass more." His face went a color I won't forget. But he turned the horse, and he rode back down my road the way he'd come, slow, reading my land the whole way like he was memorizing it. And I stood at my fence with the post maul in my hand until he was a speck and then nothing, and only then did I let myself shake. I turned around. Ruth was standing on the porch. She had the rifle. She'd had it the whole time, I saw that now, standing just inside the door where he couldn't see her, holding my rifle in 2 hands that knew how to hold it ready if it had come to that, to do the thing that needed doing. Her face was white as the snow on the peaks behind her. And little Sarah was on her hip, and she was looking down the empty road where her husband had been, and she was not crying, and she was not shaking, and when she raised her eyes to mine across the yard, there was something in them I'd never seen there before. Not fear, not gratitude, not the waiting for the bill. A decision. "He'll come back," she said. "He'll come back," I agreed. "With the law," she swallowed. "And the law's his, Elias. The law was always his. That's why I run instead of fighting. There's no fighting it. A wife's a thing a husband owns. I could stand in front of every judge in the territory and show them every mark he ever put on me, and they'd hand me back to him and call it mercy." I climbed the porch steps. Slow, my knee ached. I felt 100 years old, and I felt, underneath that, strangely, ferociously young. The way you feel when you've finally found something worth losing everything over. "Then we don't fight the law," I said. "We get ahead of it." She frowned. "How?" "We didn't sleep that night. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my ledger had lived for 4 years, and we made a plan out of the few hard pieces the world had left us, and I learned something about Ruth that I should have guessed already. She was smarter than me. A good deal smarter. She'd just never been in a room where being smart was safe. "You can't fight him," she said again, low so as not to wake the baby. "I keep telling you, in front of a judge, I'm his. That's the law, and the law don't bend." "No," I said. "It don't bend, but it's got seams. Everything's got seams, Ruth, if you look. A ledger's got seams too. I know, I kept one long enough. There's always a line between 2 columns where a thing can slip through." She looked at me. "What are you saying?" I got up and got down the good bottle from over the door, the one Sarah and I had kept for anniversaries and I hadn't touched since. And I poured 2 small glasses, and I sat back down, and I said the thing I'd been turning over since I watched Amos Kell ride down my road. "He said you're his lawful wife," I said. "And that's his whole hand. That's the only card he's holding. Take that card, he's got nothing. He's just a man that beats women, standing on another man's land with no claim to it. So we take the card. You can't just take a woman can't have 2 husbands," I said. "But a man that abandons his wife, that leaves her destitute, that drives her onto the road in her condition in this territory, Ruth, that's grounds. It's thin grounds and it's slow grounds, and a judge don't like to grant it, but it's grounds, and I know a lawyer in Helena, a hard little terrier of a man named Prout that I sold a horse to once, and who owes me for the horse being better than I said it was. And there's a piece of this you don't know." I turned my glass in my hand. "You didn't run empty-handed, Ruth. You think you did. But a woman that flees a violent house, and the whole town of Miller's Bend that watched you come in half dead, and a rancher of good standing that'll swear on the book to the state you and that baby arrived in, that's not nothing. That's evidence. That's a case. It's a bad, slow, uphill case. But it's a case, and the thing about Amos Kell is he don't want a case. A case means people looking. Men like that can't stand to be looked at." She was very still. "You'd testify against him, in front of the whole territory. You'd stand up in a courthouse and tell them what he'd done to me, how you'd know it, why you'd know it, and let every soul in Miller's Bend do the arithmetic on why a woman was living in a bachelor's house all winter. Her jaw was tight. You know what that does to you, Elias. You know this valley, they'll say. I know what they'll say. They'll say they'll say you and me. They'll ruin your name. A name you spent your whole life keeping clean and quiet and paid up. You'd throw that in the fire for me and Sarah. And here's the thing. I looked at her across that table, and I thought about my name and my clean, quiet, paid-up life, and my ledger up on the shelf with 4 years of honest accounting in it and one blank line where I couldn't figure how to write her. And I understood, finally and all the way down, that a clean name kept by a lonesome man is just a well-tended grave. That I'd been dead 4 years and calling it careful. That the only ledger worth keeping is the one where you spend everything you've got on the few things worth having, and you don't count the cost, because counting the cost is how you talk yourself out of your own life. My name, I said, ain't worth what I paid for it. I'll trade it, gladly. And here's the other piece, Ruth, and I want you to hear it plain because I'll only say it the once and I'm no good at saying it. My throat closed. I made it work anyway. The talk won't be talk if it's true, so let it be true, marry me. She didn't move. I put my hand up awkward, backing off my own words. Not like that. Not to, I ain't asking you to. After Amos, I know what a word like that means to you, and you'd have the bedroom and I'd have the chair by the stove, same as now. For as long as that's how you wanted it, forever if that's how you wanted it. I'm asking you a legal thing, a protecting thing. A man can't take back a wife that's lawfully another man's. If you're mine on paper, married proper in a church in front of witnesses, the day your divorce is granted, then Amos Kell's card is ash. He can bring the sheriff and all the paper in Helena and it won't matter, because you won't be a thing he owns anymore. You'll be a free woman that chose. And nobody, not him, not the law, not God himself, can hand a free woman back. The fire cracked, the baby breathed in her cradle. Outside, the wind came down off the peaks and worked at the north wall of the barn, and found the board she'd nailed tight and could not rattle it. That's the coldest marriage proposal I ever heard, Ruth said. I told you I was no good at it. A legal thing, a protecting thing. She was looking at me strange now. You'd marry a woman you'd tie yourself for life, throw your name in the fire, take on a baby that ain't yours and a husband that'll hate you till he dies, all as a protecting thing. Yes. Why? And I could have lied. I was a man who'd spent 4 years making his whole life a careful lie of safety, and the old lie was right there, easy, because it's the decent thing, because a body ought to help, because Sarah would have wanted it. All true enough. All coward's truth. I looked at her instead, and I told her the real figure, the one that had been sitting in the blank line of my ledger since October. Because I opened that book every night to write down what the day cost and what it gave back, I said. And every night since you come I can't do it. Because there's no column you go in, Ruth. You broke my ledger. You walked into a man's life that he'd counted down to nothing so nothing could hurt him, and you put a baby's laugh in it and a mended shirt and a nailed board and a name. You gave that child my Sarah's name and didn't even know you'd done it, and now I can't count anymore. I can't make it finite. I can't figure how frightened to be. And I've decided, my voice broke clean in half and I let it, I've decided I don't want to count anymore. I want the thing I can't add up. I want the winter that broke the book. That's why. Not decent, not Sarah, you, because a man gets one chance in his life to spend everything he saved on the one thing worth having, and I already missed it once, and I will not miss it twice. The room was very quiet. Ruth got up. She came around the table, slow, and she stood in front of my chair, and she looked down at me, this hard old rock, gone all to churned butter, 41 years old and crying at his own kitchen table like a boy. And she reached out, and she did the thing that told me everything. The thing that undid the whole locked winter of her. She took my hand. Her own choice, her own reaching. Don't grab at me, she'd said in the Hayloft in October, and I never had, not once, not the whole long winter, and here in February she reached across the table and grabbed at me, and I understood I was being given a gift so much larger than the one I'd offered that I'd be paying it back the rest of my life and glad of every day. All right, she said, rough. You strange broke-ledger man, all right, marry me then. Amos Kell came back in 9 days. He came with the sheriff like he'd promised, and he came with paper like he'd promised, and he came up my road on a bright hard March morning with the snow going to mud and the first smell of the far-off spring in the wind, and he found us standing on the porch waiting for him, because Prout the terrier had ridden the whole way from Helena 2 days ahead, and we knew he was coming, and we knew what we held. The sheriff was a decent enough man named Hollies, tired, the way lawmen get who have spent 20 years standing between people who hate each other. He got down off his horse, and he didn't like being there, you could see it, and he said, "Elias, got a complaint says you're holding this man's wife." "I'm not holding anybody, Hollies," I said. "There's no wife of his here." Amos started forward off his horse with his face going ugly, and Hollies put an arm out without even looking at him, the tired, unhurried arm of a man who's done this 1,000 times, and Amos stopped. Prout stepped out of my house onto the porch. Little man, bad suit, eyes like a ferret that's found the henhouse. He had the papers in his hand, and he had that particular joy that lawyers get, God love them, when the law for once is on the side of the person who deserves it. "Sheriff Hollies," Prout said, pleasant as pie, "I'm Josiah Prout, attorney, Helena. I represent Mrs. Ruth Crane." He let that sit half a second. Crane. Married these 3 days past in the Methodist Church at Miller's Bend. Reverend toll officiating, before God and 11 witnesses whose names are on this here certificate. Following a decree of divorce from one Amos Kell granted on grounds of cruelty and abandonment by Judge Mercer of the Territorial Court, which decree I also have, in triplicate, and which I'd be pleased to read aloud in full if the morning's not pressing. The silence on my porch was a beautiful thing. Amos Kell's face went through about 4 different men in the space of 4 seconds. The confident one, then the confused one, then the one that finally understood, and then the last one, the true one, the one under all the others, which was just a small, mean, frightened creature that had never in its life been able to keep a single thing that wasn't chained down. "That's," he said, "that's a trick. She can't, that ain't Hollies, that ain't legal, a man can't just." "It's legal," Prout said cheerfully. "It's about the most legal thing I ever drew up. Would you like to contest the divorce, Mr. Kell? We'd welcome it. We'd surely welcome it. Mrs. Crane has testimony, hers, Mr. Crane's, and the sworn statements of 6 residents of Miller's Bend regarding her condition upon arrival in this valley last October, that we have been simply aching to enter into a public record. Aching. You bring your contest, sir, and we will fill a courthouse with the particular history of your marriage, and we will read it slow, and we will read it loud, and every soul from here to Helena will know exactly what kind of man rides 9 miles to reclaim a woman who near died getting away from him. Shall we? Shall we do that?" Amos Kell looked at the sheriff. The sheriff looked at his own boots, which is where a decent tired man looks when the law has finally, for once, landed where his conscience already was. "There's no complaint here, Amos," Hollies said quietly. "Woman's lawfully divorced and lawfully remarried. Ain't a thing in these papers I can act on. You want to fight the divorce, you go to Helena and you do it proper." And he glanced at Prout, at Ruth, at the certificate. "And I'd think hard on that, was I you. I'd think real hard on whether you want all that read out." I watched it happen. I watched a hard man understand he'd lost. Not a fight, he'd have understood a fight. But this thing with no fists in it, this thing where the woman he thought he owned had reached out one winter and grabbed a life for herself out of nothing but her own sand and a Broke-Ledger rancher's refusal to turn her away. I watched him understand it. And I watched him decide, the way small, mean things always decide when the room finally has more than them in it, to leave. He gathered his reins. But before he turned the horse, he looked at Ruth, looked at her for the first time since he'd ridden up, really looked, at this woman on the porch who was not white-faced now, not shaking, who stood with her chin up and our daughter on her hip and my ring on her hand. And something crossed his face that I truly think, was the closest that man ever came in his life to shame. "You'll be back," he said to her. "Lo, his kind gets tired of a used woman and another man's brat, you'll see. You'll be walking a road again by fall." And Ruth, my Ruth, who'd come to me in October unable to say a word above a whisper, who'd flinched at ma'am. Ruth looked at Amos Kell across my yard, steady, and she did not raise her voice, and she said the truest thing I ever heard spoken on that land. "Maybe," she said, "but it'll be a road I picked, and I've learned the difference, Amos. That's the thing you never counted on. I've learned there's a difference between a road you're driven down and a road you choose, and I'd walk a hard, chosen road barefoot the rest of my life, for I'd sleep one more warm night in a house that wasn't mine to leave." Amos Kell had no answer to that. "There isn't one." He turned his horse and he rode down my road for the last time, and the mud sucked at the hooves, and Hollies touched his hat to Ruth. "Ma'am," he said, and she didn't flinch. She nodded back like a woman who'd earned it. And the sheriff rode after, unhurried, and Prout slapped me on the back and said he'd stay for the coffee he'd been promised. And the March wind came down warm off the peaks with the spring in it at last. And I stood on my porch with my wife and my daughter, and I did not, for the first time in the memory of my whole grieving accounted for life, feel the need to write a single thing down. That was 11 years ago. I'm telling you this now because Sarah, little Sarah, 4 months old in a hayloft, 12 years old this June, and tall as her mother and twice as stubborn as either of us, found the ledger last week. Up on the shelf where it sat all this time, forgotten, the pages gone soft with dust. She brought it to me at the kitchen table, the same table, and she opened it to the last page I ever wrote, October of that year, and she pointed at the blank line under it, all those empty pages after, and she said, "Pa, why'd you stop? You wrote in it every day for years and then you just quit. Right here." What happened right here? And Ruth at the stove, going gray now, both of us are, and neither of us minds. Ruth went still, and looked at me over our daughter's head, the way she looked at me across 10 feet of cold October loft a lifetime ago. And I took the book from Sarah's hands, and I looked at that blank line I could never fill, the one where a woman and a baby walked into my accounted-for life and broke the arithmetic forever. And I thought about all the ways I could answer a 12-year-old's question. I could tell her about the hayloft, the croup, the barn, the steam, Amos on the road, Prout's papers, the whole hard winter of it. Instead, I picked up the pen, dry these 11 years, and I found it still had a little ink in it, the way some things do, waiting. And under that last blank line in the old book in the old hand, I finally wrote the account for the day everything changed, what it cost me, what it gave back. I turned the book around so she could read it.